Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fensky. These are tough times to be a parent. Most schools in the St. Louis area are being conducted almost entirely online. That's left parents scrambling to set up Zoom calls for their kids, even as they handle their own workloads. But the burden is even heavier for parents of children with developmental disabilities. Many of these students needed special support even before the pandemic. And now parents are doing whatever they can to try to provide it, but it's just not always possible. One of those parents is Diane Southard. She is raising 8 children in St. Louis County, and she joins us today to talk about her experience. Diane, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I'm hoping you can start by telling us a bit about your family. I understand 5 of your children have some form of developmental disability. What are they dealing with?
Well, so I have 5 children who all have IEPs, and 3 of them have a diagnosis of a developmental disability, including an intellectual disability. And all 3 of those children also have difficulty talking. 1 does not use any verbal words at all, and 2 have very limited language, and so they also use augmentative communication devices to help them communicate.
And you use that phrase IEP. I know that's something that parents talk a lot about, but for our listeners who aren't parents, what exactly is that?
So these are individual education plans. And so it is something that is afforded to us for children who are showing that they're having difficulties in learning. Some people might have an IEP, an individualized education plan, which is particular to them. It is individualized because every child has a different need. We're all not able to be put into a box. Some other people have 504 plans, so while their needs may not be as significant as other students, they might have some issues which might be just medical, where they need some extra support, but it's afforded to us while we all are afforded our free appropriate public education, which we often call FAPE.
Okay. And so with these IEPs, normally when kids are in school, that means they get some extra services. There's special attention paid to try to keep them at the right grade level and help them learn the way that they need to learn. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is. In fact, I have 2 students who have IEPs where they just have some supportive services, assistance with reading and math, and they might receive those in class, outside of class, some push-in services into the general education environment, extra processing time for test taking. And those help them stay up with the rest of their peers. I also have the 3 students who have significant disabilities who actually have one-to-one paraprofessional support. So they have actually an individual who is with them all throughout the day, helping them so they can stay on task.
Okay. So that's during a normal school situation. Okay. They have that one-on-one help. But I understand that now, due to this pandemic, 7 of your 8 kids are home with you for school. Is that right? How is that even possible? My mind just hurts even trying to think about what that must require.
Well, Wi-Fi is failing. We've upgraded. So, yes, I have 7 e-learners here. I fortunately have 1 e-learner who is attending St. Louis University in an apartment across the street. So she is not having to deal with our Wi-Fi. But I have 7 individuals who are all e-learning here. And honestly, I have to say 3 of them have basically not been able to access the virtual learning at all.
Is this a problem with your Wi-Fi, or is this a problem with their needs and what comes through with virtual learning?
The issue with it is I am one person having to assist 3 individuals who have one-on-one pair support. And honestly, since the pandemic, it has significantly impacted my 9-year-old daughter who has a medical diagnosis of autism. She does not use any language, but she does communicate. And in her form of communication right now is she's very frustrated. She doesn't understand all these changes in rules, regulations, and schedules. And over the past 2 weeks since our virtual learning has started, she has had a really hard time, and it is impacting her safety. And so just not being able to leave her alone at all does not allow me to assist my other two children who need that one-on-one para support. And I need to keep her safe. I need to make very difficult decisions for my family, and that means foregoing their virtual learning and instead just using the supplies that our school has really worked hard to give us so we can accommodate it. However, it does not even come close to what the services they were receiving in the school environment during the typical pre-COVID time.
Diane, this sounds like just such a frustrating situation for you. How are you able to even cope with just not being able to have, you're not 7 people and here you are trying to do the work of so many other people. I mean, this sounds like just an incredibly difficult time for your family.
It is. It is a very difficult time. The biggest issue, though, is really watching my children just be frustrated because they want to learn. My son, who is a senior, it's his senior year, he has limited language, but he tells me high school, and he names the friends in his class. He wants to go. He wants to see them. However, he can't. He needs that increased time to be able to respond to questions. He needs to know exactly what the topic is, what is expected, how long it's going to take, and what comes next. He requires a very scheduled life to be able to really be fully active in this. And when all those things are in place, he does very well. This is not happening right now. My 16-year-old daughter is actually using her A+ hours, which is a program throughout Missouri where students can actually earn some opportunity for free college after graduation. She's using that time during her ACT lab, which is basically a study hall, where yesterday was my son's first session he was able to participate in virtually because my daughter spent her school time, her ACT lab time, doing one-on-one with him. And even that, he only was able to successfully be on 10 minutes because our kids are so off schedule, we're having to help them get back in. With any student, it takes a lot to get back into the school year. Our students with disabilities, specifically significant disabilities, are really having a hard time struggling. We're being asked to stay at home. You're asked to wear a mask when you go out. And we have to help. My son and my 2 sons and my daughter who have significant disabilities also have a lot of sensory issues. So helping them wear a mask takes so much out of them anyways. And then they're not able to they don't understand all the social rules about social distancing. And so it's been really difficult for them.
We're talking here today to Diane Southard. She is the mother of 8 children in St. Louis County and just dealing with a lot of complications due to this pandemic and having virtual schooling to handle on her own at home. Our second guest today has some insight into how this is playing out for families across the region and across, frankly, the U.S., and that is Dr. John Constantino. He is co-director of the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Center at Washington University School of Medicine. Dr. Constantino, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So you recently co-authored a letter in the Journal of American Psychiatry. This was about the impact of the pandemic on individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And you started by saying, other than people who are infected with COVID-19, no group has been more impacted by this pandemic. How so?
Well, I think it's basically telling Diane's story. Most people don't understand that everything that she described has nothing to do with the infection. It has to do with the fact of what the pandemic has done to restrict access to necessary supports that individuals with developmental disabilities need to be engaged in education and to make their great contributions to the community and society that they do. What we've been talking about is the impact on children, and there's a whole separate world of impact on adults with disabilities, and then a whole separate impact on people with disabilities who actually are infected or at risk for infection by COVID. And so what we wanted to do in this letter in the American Journal of Psychiatry was to garner the perspectives of the leading clinician scientists around the U.S. who are engaged in research and clinical care for individuals across the age spectrum for developmental disabilities, and to report on what in a concise way, what is the real magnitude of impact. And what you heard from Diane is exactly what we probably not in any way as eloquently, really, or as high impact, but put into words so that the public would understand.
Diane talked about having these individualized education plans for 5 of her kids. And under some of them, she's supposed to get services that include, a one-on-one aide here to help them with their work. She's not getting that during this pandemic. From what you've learned from other school districts and other families dealing with this, is this common, that kind of service has just vanished?
It's absolutely common. And developmental disabilities affect approximately 1 in 6 U.S. children. And so when you think about what that means in terms of the burden across the country, let alone in our own region, this is a very common problem, Sarah. And I think one of the things about the conversation about return to school and about the allocation of resources for children in education is that, luckily, telehealth and video conferencing has made moving on with life possible for many children and many people, but not for this population, or not for many of them. For some of them who can, manage, and some children with disabilities even benefit from a telehealth kind of or a video conferenced virtual learning kind of platform. But most that are affected and are burdened in the way that Diane was describing really just have no play. And so we think that this needs to be an incredibly highly prioritized part of the conversation about returning to school, is not just, how much virtual, how much in person, but who really needs in person to make any kind of educational progress and to have a play at continuing their learning.
Diana, it kind of seems like the idea of this population falling through the cracks is almost an open secret among some educators and parents, that people are like, this is just part of what's happening in this pandemic. And there seems to be this attitude that we all need to sacrifice to keep COVID-19 counts under control. And if that's not your top priority, it should be. And yet, you're dealing with the fallout from that. What would you say to people who are trying to balance the importance of both of these issues?
Very good, very good question, because I've written to everyone that I could possibly do. I really truly understand the concerns of the pandemic, but what I've said is that our best is not good enough. We need to do better. We need to prioritize and almost triage right now what we can do. There are people who need to go into the hospital for certain care. Some people can be taken care of at home. I have students who are capable of staying at home and learning, but my other children, I have 3 children we are failing them. We are not offering them what they need. And the long-term aspect is, I don't even want to look at that. As a parent of a person with a disability, we're always looking for the next steps. What is what we are doing right now going to help them to be as independent as possible? And I just ask them to look at what we are doing, how we are looking into the future, because we have been asked to sacrifice by many people that I have written letters to. At this time, they're asking us to sacrifice. I cannot sacrifice my children. We've already been doing this since March 13th when we came home from school for spring break, and they have not been to school yet, and we are not able to give them what they need to continue to learn. We need to look at other options and see what safe steps we can to get our students who most need it back in class.
We're talking today to Diane Southard. She's a mother of 8 in South St. Louis County. We're also talking to Dr. John Constantino. He's the co-director of the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Center at Washington University School of Medicine. We do need to take a quick break, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. That's 90.7 KWMU. And now back to our conversation. We're talking about the challenges faced by parents of children with disabilities with Diane Southard. She's the mother of 8 children in St. Louis County, 5 of them with special needs. And we're also joined today by Dr. John Constantino. He's the co-director of the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Center at Washington University School of Medicine. And Dr. Constantino, as we were talking about before the break, you wrote a letter, co-authored a letter, that was published in the Journal of American Psychiatry, just highlighting these issues and calling for some changes, saying that we need to make it a priority to figure out how to get some of these kids back in school. I understand your initial audience was clinicians, but it really struck a chord. What kind of reaction did this letter get?
Well, it got, I think, a very appropriate recognition by the media. It got picked up by several major news outlets, including CNN and MSN. The state offices for developmental disabilities have gradually been disseminating the information and the letter to its constituents to kind of get everybody's mind around the problem for all stakeholders for the cause of individuals with developmental disabilities. And the national group of the Association of University Centers on Disabilities actually shared the letter with all members of Congress, and we've already been getting responses from them about thanking the group for clarifying the issues and giving them a target to work on. And one of those targets in relation to education, relates to thinking about how in-person support, whether at home or in the schools, needs to be really very carefully considered and prioritized. And I want to say, Sarah, that as a physician, one of our biggest concerns and highest priorities is to protect our teachers and to make sure that they're safe. I think that the point here of talking about this is that as the conversations proceed about amalgams of in-person and virtual learning for students, and trying to as soon as we can, and we're getting better with rapid testing. We're getting closer, hopefully, to a vaccine. I think there are going to be new things on the horizon as we move forward. But I think people have to be poised that as these conversations are moving forward and considering any options for students to resume and normalizing in-person education, I think this population of children needs to be at the front of the discussion and really very highly prioritized given how hard this has been on them and their families.
You wrote in this letter, quote, "From an educational standpoint, the many individuals at risk for such consequences from online learning should be the first to return from school. They deserve priority for resources to safely resume in-person learning." Yet it feels like in some cases, it feels like just the opposite. Do you think that's fair to say in terms of how we've handled this so far up to this point?
Well, I think we certainly can't say anything on that vein of schools that have gone completely virtual. I mean, for that there's an equity across all students, even though that it incurs an inequity for the students with disabilities because they're less able to use virtual learning than everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem there has been that the fallback of virtual learning, although it is a solace for most of the population of children, is no solace for these kids and really not a solution. But I think the bigger issue is that there are some districts where, combinations of in-person learning and virtual learning or school-based activities, even sports, have actually been reenacted or invigorated without any, co-occurring prioritization of these students whose needs for in-person support, coaching, mentoring, education, literally outstrip that of almost any student that you can imagine.
Mm-hmm. Diane, are you seeing that in the district that serves your children? Are they bringing things back like sports and things that maybe feel a little less of a priority to you?
Well, one thing if you go for the perspective, for these students, sports is very important to them. But yes, sports are going on. My junior daughter actually goes off. She plays golf, so that's a little safer than most. But she leaves the house every day to go practice with her high school golf team. At our local elementary school where my children are not allowed to go to receive their IEP services, we do have the before and after school care that is there all day long. And, I understand that is deemed essential. People do need to be able to go to work, but my students are also being denied being able to go in and receive the therapies that are offered, that are afforded to them in their individualized education plans.
And Diane,
just
to make sure I understand this, so they previously would offer like an aftercare type service. Now they're making that available to students to study there during the day, perhaps with social distancing while they're doing their virtual learning.
Correct. They are able to safely keep those students there all day long. However, they have not figured out a way to bring in our students who most need therapy services, who are not able to utilize their Chromebooks or other communication, their computers to access virtual learning. So they can keep some students safe. They can't keep my children safe.
Dr. Constantino, that sounds like exactly the kind of thing you're talking about, that if we can figure out how to do this one thing, why can't we figure out how to prioritize this other one?
That's right. And I think, there are options that I think have to be very carefully considered about, again, higher levels of precautions for the teachers, including even various kinds of PPE that would protect, teachers for close contact with students who need that. I think another consideration is that we are just now entering the era of rapid turnaround testing with saliva. There are several FDA-approved opportunities for that, and we are hoping that there will be opportunities to use that kind of testing on even a daily basis to reassure teachers and faculty and identify kids who have contracted COVID to certainly keep them home and safe, but to place a higher level of safety for teachers. I mean, I think it's very important to clarify that under any circumstances with groups of children, teachers are already putting themselves at some degree of risk, and we want to protect our teachers. And at the same time, if we're willing to allow a certain level of risk, we really have to think carefully about how to frame that in relation to what the level of needs of the children to be educated are.
We've heard from a number of listeners on our social media for St. Louis on the Air, and Diane, they just really feel for you. Joshua writes on Twitter, "I can't imagine how hard this would be. I have 2 boys virtual learning, a 5th grader with an IEP communication disability, and then a neurotypical kindergartner. Just trying to navigate these 2 has been a nightmare." And Jennifer writes on Facebook, "As a parent of a special needs child who is struggling, area school districts returning to in-person school need to prioritize bringing back special needs kids who need significant support first. Other districts are already doing this. In Springfield, Missouri, they have 4-day in-person for both special needs and early childhood." Dr. Constantino, you said your letter was being widely circulated. It got to the halls of Congress. That's terrific to hear. Do you feel like the administrators who could really make a difference here, or the people in the education systems of the states, are hearing this call and are taking this seriously now, as you say, as some of these tests are becoming more available and we can start seriously considering this stuff?
Well, we certainly hope so, and I can say with confidence, knowledge from the effort that the Special School District of St. Louis County, for example, has very seriously entertained and considered a strategy if we can implement rapid testing for their teachers, that this would, take up the level of confidence up a notch, that they would be, very engaged in the conversation. And our Unified Special School District of St. Louis County is one of many special education programs region-wide, but one of extraordinary quality and collaboration. And it's my ardent hope that we will be able to get these conversations on the table as schools are understandably scrambling to just, try to have some kind of semblance of a strategy for education in the context of a constantly moving target of a pandemic.
I know that there are requirements under the law for kids who have IEPs. School districts have to take that very seriously. Do you think if school districts don't start thinking about this seriously and find a way to have effective education for these kids, down the road there might be a lawsuit against some of these districts?
You bet, because I think and not to be saying that in a threatening kind of way, but just to underscore Diane's point in another way, that families who have watched the progress of their children starting from March at the start of the pandemic, for those kids who just cannot benefit from virtual learning, they have watched their children's educational and achievement and even social and communicative progress either stall or go backwards as a function of the pandemic. And so there are real consequences of the decisions that are made about who to provide in-person education. And I think that there are many kids for whom, although it is a sacrifice, virtual learning is working and they are making progress. And there has to be equity in thinking about what all children need to be able to reach their highest potential.
Diane, in our last minute here in this conversation, I know this has been a very frustrating period for you going back to last March, but you're continuing to do what you can. Does it give you some hope to hear Dr. Constantino saying that this letter is being circulated? People are talking about this issues, that there might be some changes ahead?
Oh, definitely. I think, we just want to be heard, and just for people to understand, it's not that we're looking for babysitters. It's not that we're looking to put our kids somewhere else. We are actively trying to help, but what the tools we have are not working. And there's nothing worse than watching your child try and not be able to be successful. And so reading Dr. Constantino's letter and knowing that it's going out, and I'll be following up actually with my legislators and Dr. Sam Page and sending it out to make sure everyone has read that and understand, it's just nice to be heard.
Well, I'm glad that you're feeling heard. And I guess I want to tack on one last question to what I said would be the last question. Dr. Constantino, if parents are hearing this or just listeners are hearing this and they feel led to add their voices to this, what do you think is the most effective way they can help amplify this message you're trying to get out?
Well, I think definitely making sure that everybody in the community is aware. I think one of the things we were very concerned about is people just don't realize. I think once people know what the magnitude of the problem is, most of the public is good-hearted and people understand. I think people try to recognize what's needed as far as the impact of things on people with developmental disabilities in our society. But I think sharing it, spreading the word, there's a number of links that can be easily shared in social media, and I think getting the word out and certainly advocating at the levels that Diane's talking about, local government, the school boards, and the leaders of the special education programs.
All right. Well, Dr. John Constantino, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And Dr. Constantino, again, is the co-director of the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Center at Washington University School of Medicine. And I also want to thank Diane Southard for joining us and sharing about her experience. Diane, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you as well.
Yes, and best of luck to you. I know you have your plate full. We really appreciate you making the time with everything else you've got going on, so thank you.
You're welcome.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. That's 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.